Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming to my session. I appreciate it. I love presenting at Nerd Summit. I've done it a number of years now. It was one of the first camps I ever presented at. So back when it was the Western Mass Drupal camp. So I'm always excited to come back and speak. So if you haven't read the title and you misread your paper guide, this is how to choose an open source license, which I think, as someone who works with open source technologies, is an important thing for us to all know. So before we talk about that, though, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Hi, I'm Mike Miles. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I am a developer, and I actually work as the Senior Technical Solutions Manager for a digital marketing company, digital marketing agency called Genuine. Genuine, what do we do? Well, we're a full-service digital marketing agency that builds agile brands that can stay culturally relevant. So we help brands become easier to love by their consumers. I know by the people who love to use them in other markets. We would leverage all our full-service tool sets that we have in-house capabilities, from digital strategy to SEO and content capabilities, video and production teams. We have our own in-office video studio, which is really cool. We have a whole creative and design department, UX department, and then development, which is split into 3 sub-departments: .NET technologies, some of which are open source, the PHP team, which I help lead, which uses mainly Drupal and some Symfony and a little WordPress, and then our front-end team who does cool things like Node and React and all the very fun JavaScript stuff. So yeah, that's what I do at Genuine during the day. At night, I am the host of a podcast called Developing Up, which is focused on the non-technical side of being a developer. I was excited to actually sponsor Nerd Summit this year, so I have stickers. If you want stickers, please come and get them afterwards. So yeah, Developing Up, we talk about subjects that aren't technical, but are important for developers to know, such as our last episode was about imposter syndrome and dealing with that. And that came out last Tuesday. I recommend you check it out. We're in season 2. If you want to know any more about me, you can find me anywhere on the internet, Mike Miles 86, from Twitter to Google Plus to YouTube to LinkedIn. Anywhere it's a social network, that's my handle. So what I want to talk about today about open source licenses is broken down into 3 areas. As I show you 4 fingers. Bonus. Why it's important to choose an open source license if you're a developer. How many people here would consider themselves developers? All right, a good majority of the room. How many people here work with developers? Okay. All right, great. So yeah, we're going to talk about why it's important for your software to make it open source if you're building something, or for using open source software with licenses. Going to talk about what open source licenses actually are, what they entail, what they mean, what restrictions and what freedoms they allow for software. And then finally, the meat and potatoes at the end, how to choose the right open source license for your project. Step-by-step guide, so when you walk out of here, you'll know exactly what license to use. But before we talk about that, I need to tell everybody here one more thing about myself. I am not a lawyer. Intellectual property law is big and complicated. You know, stuff that you put licenses in place for to protect the stuff that you create. So what I'm going to explain to you is not legal advice. If you find yourself being sued because of the license you picked for your project, you can't say, well, this guy at this conference told me this. No, I am not a lawyer. That's the most important thing you can take away from this talk. No, that's the least important thing, but it's important for me to highlight. One more statement to make. I believe that code is art. And actually, I don't actually believe it as much so as I know this is a fact. Anytime you write code as a developer, anytime your developers you work with produce code, you're producing a piece of creative work. It has the same rights and protections as, say, a piece of literature, like a book, a painting, a sculpture, a piece of music. It's something that as soon as you create it, you have implicit rights to it. What this means is it's proprietary to you or your team, if you're working with a team. And it's not intrinsically available. Intrinsically is the wrong word. I'm trying to use big words. It's not available for anyone else just to grab and copy just because you created it. It's copyrighted, basically. Now, what is copyright? Just a real crash course on it. It's the right to allow a creator of creative works to distribute what they produced. They have the right to do that, and only they do. In terms of software, it's like this. So if we have a piece of software we write, and we just create it, we have control of it. It's proprietary to us. We have the copyright ownership, which means we can say, I'm going to give it to these 2 people. I'm going to distribute it to them. You have the right to do that. It's your software. You can give it to whoever you want for whatever reason. That's okay. But person A, the top person there, if they try to give it to 2 other people, they're not allowed to do that. They don't have the rights to make a copy and give it out. Only you do. Now, they can set up some sort of licensing deal with you, and you can tell them, yeah, you can give it to people. But just because you give them a copy, they are not allowed to give a copy to anyone else. So copyright is basically the legal right of a creator to control who can distribute or alter their software. And I'll get into the altering part in a moment. And that's what you have when you produce your creative work of software. You have the copyright. It's proprietary to you out of the box. And you have the control over who can use it and how. This also means that only you can define how your software is used. For example, let's say this software we're creating, I'm using us collectively. We're going to be a software team for the rest of the talk. Let's say that this software is, we wrote something for doing GPS navigation, but we only apply it for ships. That means even if our GPS software is very abstract and usable other places, say for autonomous vehicles, unless we are thinking to use it in that way, it can't be used that way. Maybe it could be used for self-guiding rockets, but unless we dictate that, it can't be used that way. So SpaceX and Tesla can't just take our code and use it. When you write code out of the box, proprietary, copyrighted, only you can create improvements to it. What this means is, say we have our GPS software, we put a nice little GUI on top of it, make it easier to use. But if someone comes along and says, hey, you know what? I like your software, I'm on a ship, but I can make the GPS navigation 10 times more faster or accurate. I want to give it to you. That doesn't work. For one thing, when they create an improvement, that's a piece of creative work. They have copyright claim over it. They have proprietary access to it. So if they try to give you their copyrighted code to add to your project, and you were put in your project, who owns that project? Where does their code stop and your code start as soon as their code starts affecting yours? It's this big legal gray area. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't get into all of it. So this gets into the question of, why do we write software as developers? Why do you have developers create software? Why do we work in code? This is a little more existential question. I think as a developer, if you're a developer, you've asked yourself this once or twice, like, why am I doing this? Why am I making lights blink on a screen? That's essentially what we do. Everyone turns pixels on and off. I think every developer out there writes software or code, whatever you want to call it, to solve a problem in the world. I don't think any developer writes code because they don't want to solve something. They don't want to improve someone's life in some way. We all have challenges we're trying to meet with the software we write. Based on the keynote, eventually computers will just be like, I got this. I will solve your problems for you. And then we get to lounge around all day. I don't know. The problem is the world is a big place. And if we write code and we only apply it one way, we can only solve a problem one way. And that may not work for as many people as possible. We're not making our code solve as many problems as it can. So if we were to open source our software, we can open it to the world and invite them to make our product better for them to be more useful, so that our piece of creative work can be distributed and used throughout the world to solve even more problems. That's why I believe we need to create open source software. This gets into what this talks about, open source license. If you want people to help you with your code, if you want people to use and modify your code, you need to open source it. Well, you don't need to, but you should. An open source license doesn't remove your copyright claim or your patent claims if you put patents on your software. It allows you to use the copyright system to grant permissions to others to make copies of your code, make alterations of your code, and improve upon your code in a way that you dictate. So open source licenses allow software to be freely modified, shared, while establishing guidelines and maintaining your copyright claim. Now, some people are confused when you say, I'm going to make open source software. They think, oh, I'm writing something for free. Open source does not equal free. I think if anyone here works with open source technologies, you know you don't work for free. You make money. You earn a living. Just because you create open source software doesn't mean you can't make money from it. You can make money from services around that software. You could earn a living from what that software produces. To some extent, you can even take your open source software, put it in something that you can keep proprietary, and then sell access to and make money that way, but still being powered by open source. So what happens when we open source our software? We have our GPS software for ships. We remove our intrinsic copyright claim. Well, not really remove it, but if we make our software open source, so I'm going to get rid of this little lock icon. All of a sudden, if we apply an open source license, we allow for the creation of what are known as derivatives. What this means is that someone can find our code, they can make a copy of it, a derivative, change it so that it works for autonomous vehicles. So now Tesla can take our code, put it into their Tesla cars, and their cars are using our software. Someone else can take it, make an alteration, and apply it to their rockets. So now SpaceX is using our software. We're solving more problems than just our ships. That's awesome. That's exciting. A derivative is just the alteration or extension of a piece of software. Making your code open source with an open source license allows people to do this. Open sourcing our software also, get rid of that lock icon, invites improvements. So going back to the scenario where someone says, hey, I want to make your accuracy much better. Here's a piece for it. If your code is open source, you can accept that. No problem. You can add it on, make your software better. Someone else can say, hey, I'm going to solve this problem for you. Add it on. Someone says, I'm going to solve this problem for you. You can add it on. Yes.
Do they need to have do they need to be open source and able to?
That's a good question. So the question was, do these people need to be open source to be able to contribute? Spoiler alert, we will get to that.
Oh.
It depends on the situation, but most likely, yes. So you may say, okay, Mike, this is great. I want people to use and make copies to apply to their problems. I want to invite people to make improvements. Why do I have to have an open source license? Can't I just say, here, world, take my code, benefit from it? Yes, you can. It's called the unlicensed. It's basically as close as you can get to public domain in code as possible. It's if you were to apply an unlicensed and you have to explicitly say your code is unlicensed, you are saying, I remove all copyright claims from this, use it to your own extent, to your own will. The problem with that is then you have no say, no control. You can't guarantee that you get the credit for the work that you did. Developers, if I'm any example of the general developer, we're all egotistical and we want credit for where credit's due. But you can do this, and this is very noble of you. But if you want to still own your copyright, if you want to help control how your software is being used, you don't want to use an unlicensed, you want to use an open source license. I'll show you one situation why. Have our software. Let's say we take it and we put it in a distribution that we make proprietary, closed source, which you can do. Then we sell that distribution for ship navigation. Right, so we have a layer on top of our open source GPS software. We can make money there, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Someone else takes our software, still makes a derivative. They can still go ahead, apply it to autonomous vehicles. No problem there. But if someone else were to take our software that's open source, put it in their own proprietary package, and then try to sell it to ships for ship navigation, suddenly we have competition. We're competing against ourselves. We just don't get the revenue. And this is very consumerism example. But if we have an open source license, we can have a clause in our license that says you can't go after our patented use of this. We can protect against the competition in our field of expertise by still allowing people to solve different problems. This is one use case. There's other things you can do with an open source license. But this, if you were just to unlicense your software, you can't stop someone from competing with your own code with you in your business.
What about liability?
What was that?
Liability with unlicensed.
What about with liability with license, as in terms of?
If somebody uses open source unlicensed.
Yep.
Unlicensed, and something breaks.
So the question was, what happens if someone uses software that has an unlicensed? Where's the liability? That's the thing with an unlicensed and with some open source licenses, which I'll get into. The code gets released to use at your own risk. If something breaks, if it's unlicensed, no one can come after you. If it is a certain open source license, I'll get into in a little bit, people can't come after you for claims. Other ones they can.
You might want to specify, you mean unlicensed capital U, not unlicensed lowercase u.
Yes. Good.
There
are
is a
different
license called unlicensed.
Yeah, sorry, I mean
from unlicensed code.
Yes, sorry, I meant unlicensed code. You removed any licenses from it, and you told the world that you don't have a license on it, except for the license that says there's no license. You can still say to use at risk.
That would be a license.
Yeah.
The unlicensed capital U includes a disclaimer.
Does it? All right. Thank you for clarifying that. I actually didn't know that. So good clarification. But we'll get into that a little bit more. Now I really have to be on my game. Someone knows something about licenses. All right. So we want to open source license our software. Where do we find our licenses? There's the Open Source Initiative. Started in 1998. They've been around for 20 years. They just posted a picture of their 20-year anniversary birthday cake on their website, opensource.org. What this organization does is they help promote and normalize the term open source by reviewing licenses and saying, this meets the criteria to be open source, or this does not meet the criteria to be open source. What they're looking to do is to protect the creators of works and the users of that software and make sure a license provides those protections. They have a number of criteria they use to evaluate licenses. Licenses are being created probably every day. If someone submits to the Open Source Initiative, they review it using at least 10 pieces of criteria, if not more. I'm going to highlight just 4 pieces of criteria. Number 1, an open source license must be free to use. You cannot create a license and say, hey, I have this fancy new open source license, pay me to use it. That's redundant. That doesn't work. You can't be considered an open source license. Open source licenses, majority of them, and we'll get into this as well, must require access to the source code. They all require access to at least the compiled code, but some of them say the uncompiled or uncompressed and compressed or uncompiled and compiled code. You're basically saying anyone who wants to have access to review the code can have it, or even have the code. Most open source licenses, if not all of them, must allow for the creation of altered works, of derivatives, of additions. They have a clause that state that. And the most important one I think of is that all open source licenses have a thing that say you must provide attributions to the originator of this work. So if you use a piece of open source software, either within your code or just in your project, you have to make sure you give credit to that person who created that, either by keeping their license or keeping a credit file. Just says this person created this piece of this work. Now, there are 2 main types of licenses. There are the permissive licenses. Permissive open source license, they're the most basic, most simplistic. Basically, they say, use this, give me credit, use it at your own risk, and maybe have a thing about how you have to give them attribution. Beyond that, they don't really have much beyond that. Some of them do. Then there's copyleft licenses, which is a play on the word copyright, which they're on top of what permissive licenses have. They have a bunch of additional clauses, things like restrictions on how the software can be used, restrictions on the projects that use that software, what requirements they have to meet. They basically make further requirements for other software to use this software. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more so it's not confusing. But first, I want to show you how the permissive license works. So we have our software, open source. We apply a permissive license to it. If someone were to create a derivative work, they can apply whatever license they want to their derivative work, as long as it's in compliance with our license. Most of them just say you can use whatever license you want. Most say you must acknowledge the originator. Someone can make an add-on. That add-on as well can have a different license. Be a different open source license, can be another type of license. Someone can create a package, a distribution. It could be proprietary closed source code, as long as they somehow give attribution, and that's fine too. Permissive license basically says that derivatives, add-ons, and distributions don't have to use the same license as the original code with minimal restrictions. It's like as laid back as you can get with a license. Copyleft licenses, again, they build on top of that. They're a little more restrictive. So if we have a software, our software with a copyleft license, if someone makes a derivative of it, they have to use the same license as our software, is what most copyleft licenses say. They say, I have this certain license, let's say the GPL license, which is the original open source license. The derivative has to use the same license if they want to use our code or they want to make a copy of it. Add-ons as well have to use the same exact license. Packages, distributions have to use the same license. It's the condition that the derivatives, additions, or distributions, as I've said multiple times, use the same license as the original software. This promotes the open sourceness. It says, I'm open sourcing this. If you want to use it, you have to be open source as well. And the Free Software Foundation, who manages like the GPL license, they're all for this, like keeping software open source and free to use. Now, copyleft licenses themselves are actually broken into two subcategories. It's really a spectrum, but to show you the ends of the spectrum, there's weak copyleft, which only cares about derivatives and add-ons. Weak copyleft say, if you create a derivative, you create an add-on, you must use the same license as me. But they allow distributions, packages, to have a different license. You could be proprietary code if you wanted it to be closed source. Strong copyleft covers all scenarios. It says no matter what, if you use my software, you have to use the same license as I do. There's some middle areas in here that have different clauses, depending on the license you pick. But it's like weak copyleft to strong copyleft. Now, there are a lot of licenses out there that are open source. I think there's at least, I don't know, there's over 50 that the OSI lists. Most popular ones here, I just want to highlight. For example, strong copyleft, you may have heard the GPL license. There's the Eclipse license. Weak copyleft is the lesser GPL license, or Mozilla. Permissive, the most popular is MIT, and then there's the Apache license. These are just like the 6 most popular, or the 2 most popular in each category based on their website. So with so many licenses and so many conditions, how do you decide what type of open source license to use for your project? There's a lot of considerations to take into account, a lot of thought and talk you have to have with your team. But I'm going to break it down to just 4 questions you have to ask yourself. And if you ask yourself these 4 questions, you're going to know what type of license to use. This is where you start taking notes. You don't have to start taking notes. I appreciate the effort. Thank you. Number 1, what licenses are already in use in my software? Unless you're writing everything from scratch that you're going to use in your software, your application, you have to pay attention to what other libraries you're using. If you're using another open source package and it's using a strong copyleft license, then you're going to have to use a strong copyleft license. If it's a proprietary package, then you probably can't. You can't use a strong copyleft license in your package. So review the libraries you're using. If you're building a big complicated project and you're using other third-party libraries, read their licenses. See if you're in compliance with them, and if you're not, you either change your license or you have to pick a different library. Second question to ask yourself is, what are the terms of service where I'm going to host my software? If you want to open source your software, you have to make it available. You can't write your code, say, all right, this is open source, and just have it on a server or on a hard drive in your room, because then no one can get to it. I mean, I guess you could do that, but it's not open source. You have to host your software somewhere. Depending where you host it, there may be terms of services. For example, GitHub. If you put code on GitHub, the terms of service say you must allow for the creation of derivatives, of forks. They can be private. You can restrict access to and create forks, but you can't put code up on GitHub and say, no one's allowed to make a copy of this. Their terms of service don't allow that. So if you want to put up your code with a license that doesn't allow for derivatives, you may not want to put it on GitHub. There's other places like if you use the Drupal software or a Drupal framework, Drupal.org, if you put code up there for like a module or a theme, again, they have terms that say you must follow Drupal's licensing. Same with WordPress plugins. All right, question 3. Do you want derivatives, additions, and distributions to have to use the same license as you? If you're like, yes, I thought long and hard about how my software should be used. I want everyone to use it the same way as I do. You probably want to pick a copyleft license. Well, not probably, you do. But if you're like, you know what, I just want people to use this, I want credit, then you probably just want a permissive license. That's all you care about. You don't care how people use your code. If you do use a copyleft license, you have that 4th question to ask yourself. That's number 4, not number 1. Ask yourself, can others use my software in their own proprietary software? Do you want to allow that? Do you want to allow your software to be used in closed source setting? If you're like, sure, why not? Then you want a weak copyleft, because that protects against the derivatives and the additions, but it doesn't protect against, or it doesn't allow for, or it does allow for adding your code to proprietary packages. If you're like, no matter how my code's going to be used, they have to use the same license as I do, then strong copyleft is what you want to go with. All right, so 4 basic questions to get from I want to open source my software to I know what type of license I want. But come on, Mike, what license specifically? Can you just tell me which license for my project? Take all the guesswork out of it for me. No, I can't. You have to do some research on your own. Every project's different. Every team's different. Every need in distribution of software is different. But what I can do is provide you some guidelines. First guideline, only use licenses that have been approved by the open source initiative. Their job, what they do as an organization, is review licenses to make sure it protects you, protects your work, and it protects the people using your software. If you want to go spin up a Tor connection, go to the dark web and find an open source license there, that's what you want to do. I would not recommend it. Read the license before you use it. There's this great website, tldrlegal.com, which takes licenses. It has all the open source licenses out there, and it translates them into basic English, which tells you this is what it protects against, this is what it allows, this is what it doesn't cover. So if you're like, this license may be right for me, let me try to understand it. Unless you understand legalese and you went to school for that, great. Then just read the license. But you probably want to read the basic English version. They also say they're not a legal service, they're providing information. So pick an OSI approved license, read it so you understand what the implications are. And most importantly, once you pick a license for your project and you open source it, do not change your license. As soon as you put your open source project out on the web, you have to assume someone made a derivative of it. If you were to change your license as soon as you released it, let's say you released your software with a permissive license, which says, hey, you can do whatever you want, pretty much. And then you're like, actually, you know what? I want this to be a strong copy left. And you change that, but someone had already made a derivative. Now they're not in compliance with your license. Legal craziness.
Is it retroactive?
What's that?
Compliance has to be retroactive.
Are you saying that the license change will be retroactive?
No, I'm talking about if you have the same version, within the same version. You can't say, hey, this is version 1 of my software. It has this license. And you're like, actually, no, version 1 of my software has this license now. What you can do is when you create a new release, if you want to change the license, well, if you want to change the license, you have to create a new release. So an example of this from last year, React, which I see some people nodding their heads. They know the story. So Facebook has React.js. They released it with the BSD permissive license with a what's the word I want? I can't think of it. It starts with a P.
Pattern.
Patent claim. Thank you.
PSD plus patents.
Yes, they had the PSD plus patents, which people started reading it like Facebook, not Facebook, sorry. They created it. WordPress was like, hey, we're going to start using React in WordPress. And then people are like, wait, this says we can't make any patent claims against Facebook for any reason forever. And
Didn't say that.
well, it
It says
basically,
that if you did the license before.
yeah. And people were not happy with that. They're like, no, 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 no. I don't like that. We're not going to use React. In Facebook, they want people to use their stuff. So they said, let's fix this. So they created a new release. It took a lot. Once they figured out what they wanted to do, they created a new release and they applied the MIT license to it. So now it's more permissive. I mean, BSD is permissive itself. But they said, all right, here, MIT license. Everyone's happy. WordPress was like, all right, cool. We're going to start using it. But they had to create a new release. They couldn't just say, hey, this version of React now has this different license. Can't do that. I mean, I technically don't do it. So, just to recap, I believe open source projects can change the world. And you should too. If you want to fix the world's problems with your code, open source it. If you want to invite the world to modify your code to make it work for them, use an open source license so that it can be freely modified, shared, and ask yourself the right questions to determine what license to use. What other libraries am I using? What are their licenses? Where am I going to host this code? What are the terms of services? Do I care what licenses people use, and do I really care for every situation? You know, delegate you from permissive to weak copyleft to strong copyleft. Then from there, you can start reading on tldrlegal.com what license you want to use explicitly. So that's what I have, but I want to list a couple of resources for everybody. This first bit.ly link, nerd18OSL, is this presentation. Then opensource.org is the Open Source Initiative's website, where you can read all about their organization. You can read the licenses they have and the work they do. ChooseAlicense.com is a quick tool provided by GitHub that will basically tell you what license you should use. It'll give you recommendations of what license you should use. TLDRlegal.com, I've mentioned a number of times, will take legalese and make it basic English so you can get an understanding of a license. And then another plug for my podcast, developingup.com. If you want to learn tips from other developers on how to be a better developer, not in terms of technical stuff, but in everything else that has to go along with being a developer. So with that, I'm going to open up to questions. I have stickers. And if you don't want to ask me a question out loud here, I'm on Twitter at MikeMiles86. So you just have to applaud, and then I'll answer any questions you have. Yay. Yeah.
So maybe you don't know the specifics about all licenses for all these projects, but like I noticed like in working with Drupal, it seems like it's, you know, there's this whole thing of like all the modules and everything that people build are all free and open, versus when I work on WordPress projects, people have like proprietary modules that they're, or plugins that they're selling. Is that because of the differences in licenses that were chosen for those projects, or is that a cultural thing?
So the question was, you know, what's the difference between for the WordPress and the Drupal projects with their licenses in terms of creating plugins or modules for them? Funny thing, WordPress and Drupal both use the GPL 2+ higher license. It's a strong copyleft, which means plugins and modules are under the same restrictions. Now, the terms of service on Drupal.org says you can't sell this module if you put it on our website, if you make it a contrib module in Drupal speak. I don't know what the terms of service say for WordPress plugins, but both of them allow you can sell them if you don't host your modules on Drupal.org. You could sell your module just like you can sell your plugin, but you can't restrict someone from making a copy of that code because those projects still have to use the GPL license. You can still sell it, but they have to.
It's not entirely clear. A lot of people don't GPL license.
Right, a lot of people don't, but the licenses on those frameworks say they must.
That is as yet unproven.
Well, because they use the GPL.
The GPL
License.
So because it's so the GPL applies to linking. One, it's not clear if that's legal at all. And two, there's no clarity that it applies to PHP. The term, the text that was used applies fairly clearly to derivative works. The question is a plugin a derivative work of Drupal itself?
Right. And so there's a lot of discussion of this. A lot of people believe it is. Same with plugins for WordPress. Again, I'm not a legal person, so.
Ask if you would like to sell a plugin for either of these, please consult a real attorney.
Yes, exactly. Again, not legal advice. But the general guidelines are you're not supposed to sell these because they're supposed to follow the same license.
So you know, I actually have like seen like themes can be sold because they're like HTML and PHP. So that I've heard these debates before. But like theoretically, if it was determined that the PHP extension is like a derivative of the project, then like theoretically, if they sold the use to it, could I like go and redistribute their code for free?
Yes.
Like, am I legally?
Yes.
Okay, that's so interesting. So I'm surprised it doesn't happen all the time.
It may, because I mean,
the problem is that the term derivative work is not a technical term; it's a legal term.
Yes.
That can only be defined by a judge and jury.
Yeah.
which is why you take. I mean, you interpret the license one way, someone may interpret another way. Go with the majority. I don't know. I'm not giving you legal advice.
Somewhat hilariously, the closest case law there is from Galoob Toys v. Nintendo of America, when Nintendo tried to sue the people that made the Game Genie for the NES, and that actually came down against the current interpretation of GPL that dynamic linking probably does not create derived work.
Yeah, I mean it's a little more clear with like literature and like
yes, and
audio.
video games, not web software.
But still, it's a legal gray area. Are people probably going to go after you? Probably not.
Most of legal just like put up a screen to scare people or not do. I feel like most of legal like doesn't come to head, but when it does, it sucks.
Yes, yeah. I will agree with that. So on Drupal.org, on their licensing page, they say if you create a module, you must apply the GPL license to it. I haven't read WordPress's license page, but that's what they say on Drupal.org. So
that is the opinion held by most of the free software.
Yes. Yeah, the Free Software Foundation basically says that. Hey, and if you don't want to follow that, then you figure out a different way to connect to things through like APIs or something where you're using the data that's produced and you're not actually using code. So, good question. Good answer. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
So going to like you were saying about how if you're basing your work off something that already has a license and it's one that applies to you, have to copy over the license in some of the cases. So let's say that because sometimes we even use more than one source or package when we're doing things, if they have different licenses, then would you have two licenses applying to your work, or how would that work out?
I don't know all the specifics. There are ways you can have dual licenses. It gets complicated.
So
quickly.
You don't actually have to use the same license. It's just he was thinking, I think, as a recommendation that you should.
Right. Some of them.
License. In cases where there are conflicts, you would have to probably pick one or the other.
So to ease your headache, you try to find packages that use, I don't know, the same license or complement licenses.
They're usually thought of as a spectrum of like, if one was a permissive license and one was a copyleft, you probably have to go with the copyleft.
Right. Right. If there was a hierarchy, sure, but like let's say there were two on the same level.
Most of them aren't really on the same level though. The ones that care have a fairly strict.
Yeah. But if you had like two different like permissive licenses, I think it would come down to like any additional clauses that got in the way.
In those cases, you just pick. So in those cases, you don't even have to put it under permissive license. If the thing you're deriving is permissively licensed, your new work is your own. You can license it however you want.
That's true.
It would be a real it would be a massive dick move to like GPL license 4 lines of the code base, but you can do that.
Mike, do you have any stats on like the adoption of these licenses? Is like permissive licenses on GitHub, is that like the most common, or are people doing GPL?
I have no stats, but I can say just from doing some quick research, the MIT license is used a lot. I mean, all these, there's so much software out there that's open source. So, but like in terms of web frameworks, like Node.js uses MIT, React now uses MIT, There was another one I looked up. I think GraphQL uses MIT license.
It's Facebook too, right?
Yeah. So like MIT is used. I mean, that's also like when if you create a project on GitHub, you can ask you what license you want. And people just like MIT. I'm not paying attention to this, so I don't have any numbers though.
Can you clarify the permissive license on the GitHub and making your repository private?
So the question is to clarify using permissive license on GitHub, but making your repository private. Well, permissive is like the very loosey-goosey. That's my technical legal term for it. License. So it just says like if you want to use this, you have to give me credit. There's other, depending on the license you use. But the terms of service on GitHub say you have to allow for derivatives, but they can be private forks. You know, it's forking. So you can still make your project private, but if you give other, as soon as you give other people access, you can't prevent them from making copies and then doing what they want.
Making it open source doesn't mean the world has access to it. It means that if you give it to somebody, they have to follow the same.
It means if you give it to somebody, you can't control, so to some degree, who they can give it to.
The important thing is what you said at the beginning, the copyrights. That when you write a creative work, and code is considered a creative work, as are documentation, screenshots, music, dance, whatever. There are 6 exclusive rights that only you get, and that includes making derivative works, creating copies, and selling to the public. Unless if you write that code, I'm assuming that you're not like working for a company, because usually then they get the copyright, but whoever owns the copyright, only they can do those things. Like, you can post code on the internet, and a lot of code on the internet has no license. In theory, no one can create derivative works, and no one can sell it to the public. And giving things away for free counts as a sale. It's the law. So like, if you just post on GitHub without a license, except for the GitHub terms of service, because they need to prevent this bad case, no one could do anything with it.
Yeah.
They can see it, but they can't create derivative works, and they can't distribute it to other people, including themselves. GitHub requires that if you post something, you are implicitly licensing it for redistribution, but not necessarily derivative works. You can post something on GitHub, people can copy it, but you can say you're not allowed to make derivative works of this at all. You can't change it in any way. You can't extend it, can't modify it. This is what it is. If you don't put a license on it, that's what you get, because you still hold copyright. GitHub doesn't get a copyright. Putting a license on something, a permissive or otherwise, is saying, taking some of those exclusive rights and saying, you can use some of these exclusive rights subject to certain conditions. For a permissive license, the condition is basically, give me credit and don't sue me.
Another example is like if you put your code on CodePen, and it's a public pen, that's what they call it, a pen. The CodePen terms of service say anything that's a public pen has the MIT license applied to it. But then if you pay and you have a private pen, then they don't put any license on it, and you could choose your license. You have to do something to put a license on it.
So we couldn't write a Drupal module and put it up on the pen, because that's a lesser license than the GPL.
Technically, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And they say technically.
I would like to see. Oh, I haven't really used CodePen, but
Unlikely to
yeah.
get sued over this.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's the thing is, right now, unless you're like a big organization, are you going to get sued? Probably not. What's probably going to happen? What's the word? Arbitration? No, arbitration. And they're going to be like, hey, we have to change your license, or you can't use our stuff, or something like that. I don't know. Talk to a lawyer. But yes. So yeah. So.
But private repos is just, that's about access control.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with licensing.
Good questions, man. I am not prepared for these questions. This guy is though. Thank you so much. You know more than I do. Great. That's it. If there's no other questions. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.